You should leave, girl. This place, Gar, is not for you. What I am about to tell you I will do with great discretion because I know it is not right, and above all because I could be endangering my own safety. So, there will be no names. I will only mention the place where it all happened because, well, things happen in that place every single day, and many of those things are far worse than what you are about to hear. So, it doesn't matter what you hear, what matters are the people. For that reason, I don't want to mention names. I don't want them coming to look for me one day. The Central de Abasto in Mexico City is a place where you can buy practically anything. And when I say everything, I mean everything you are thinking about right now, what is in your mind at this very moment. Yes, that thing that is so strange, so ugly, so expensive, so exotic, so illegal you find it there. It isn't for nothing that it is the largest market in the world. And if you don't believe me, you can check it yourself. You can search online and you will see that in that market things exist that you didn't even know were possible. But anyway, my story isn't about the history of the market, but about what is hidden within it. I worked near that market for a long time, not selling things or loading boxes, but as the companion of a very powerful man in the Central, one of the many, many who operate inside that place. One of those men who has more than 40 workers running just by seeing his face. He gave me money, he gave me protection, and I gave him company wherever he went. And of course, because of that, it is obvious that I saw things no woman should, but nothing prepared me for what I discovered one Sunday, because that Sunday changed my life. That man, whom we will call the gentleman so as not to have problems, is someone who still operates in the Central, and you truly do not want to mess with him. The gentleman always had strange businesses, movements in the high hours of the night, meetings with people who arrived in vans without license plates, and, of course, it all took place inside the Central de Abasto. The gentleman had very frequent meetings that I would accompany him to, but he almost always wouldn't let me go in with them, though the most disturbing thing was that every Sunday without fail, he would lock himself in a special room within the Central de Abasto in a flower section, and a meeting would take place there. He told me to wait outside, not to enter, because that was men's business. I never interfered because he wasn't someone you would question about anything. Weeks passed, months passed, until one Sunday I arrived earlier than usual to see him. That allowed me to see how, on that occasion, two men I had never seen before entered that room. I mentioned thin guys with sunken eyes and black clothes. They didn't look like workers from the Central, and they didn't have the look of merchants either. They had something different, as if they didn't fit in with the rest of the people there. I stayed outside, as always, sitting on a plastic crate, listening to the strange noises coming from inside that room, something that sounded from time to time like prayers, like footsteps, like conversations, and very occasionally, dull thuds. The hallway was empty, and I think that gave me the courage to think this was my opportunity, the chance to see what was happening in that place. My curiosity started gnawing at me inside until I couldn't take it anymore. I walked to a small window that overlooked that room, one that was very high up, but that I could reach if I put something underneath and stood on my tiptoes. That was the biggest mistake of my life. When I peeked in, at first I didn't understand what I was seeing. My partner was in the middle of the room, barefoot, without a shirt, with a necklace of red and black leaves hanging round his neck. In front of him were the two men I had seen enter earlier, the ones I told you about. They were carrying herbs, dry branches, jars with dark liquids, and they were holding a machete wrapped in a white handkerchief. They were doing something I can describe as a ritual. One was murmuring a strange prayer, something like water-like sounds. But what made my hair stand on end was that the other was burning something, and it produced a kind of yellowish smoke. Very strange, by the way. But what made me almost fall from my perch was what was in the corner. Crouched like an animal, ready to pounce, there was a creature. A being with a human torso, but covered in hair, with a face that was half wolf and half man, with eyes shining like fire. I thought I was going crazy, but it was real. That thing had claws. It breathed heavily, it growled softly, and its teeth looked like those of a rabid dog. I knew instantly that that thing was one of those that people mention in whispers like a fantasy joke, but I was seeing it right then. In the Central de Abasto, locked up like a dog, was a Nahual guardian. What chilled my blood the most was that I never saw it enter. I only saw those men and my partner enter. I never saw anyone else enter. So, who was the Nahual? Which of my partner's workers had turned into that thing? How many times had I seen him walk next to me without knowing they were actually one and the same? After that, the sorcerers continued praying and the Nahual stayed still without moving. Then, it stood up. It took a few long breaths, like a very large but docile tame dog. At that moment, I understood that my partner didn't just handle business. He managed dark forces within that place. He practiced Santeria, black magic, forbidden things that one only hears about in the neighborhoods where death walks nearby. I closed my eyes and moved away from the window without making a sound. I went directly to the nearest bathroom, trembling with the urge to vomit. Then my partner came out of the room as if nothing had happened. By then, I was already outside waiting for him, pretending I was fixing my makeup and that I hadn't seen anything. He gave me a kiss on the forehead and then told me to leave. Of course, I never mentioned this, I never asked anything. And months later, when I finally could, I separated myself from that guy's life, grateful that he never did me any harm. I don't know what would have happened if he suspected I had seen it, that I had realized that inside that room they kept a Nahual. But well, I have heard stories like that, and worse inside the Central de Abasto, that there are things, beings, that one would think only exist in the imagination, but no, they are real. There are things living in that market, and they are not of God. I remind you that we have daily videos and live streams every Wednesday and Saturday night. Thank you very much for your support. Moving on. Good evening, Memo. My name is Ismail, and I am sending you this account, hoping you place it wherever you like, since it covers 2 topics you handle on your channel. So, feel free to leave it wherever you want and where it serves you best. Well, this story is about something that happened to a colleague of mine named Rahman. Back then, Ramon was a trucker, one of those hardened by the highway who knows every curve, every town, and every story told among drivers who drive at night. My comrade was not someone easy to impress. He had been driving the same specific route for so many years, the one from San Luis Potosi toward Matehuala, that in those parts he had already seen a little bit of everything. Robberies, animals crossing the road suddenly, drunkards lying in the middle of the path, strange lights that go up and down the hills. Well, you know what I mean by strange, but none of those things marked him as much as what he experienced in the year 2017, when one night he decided to pick up a woman of ill repute to keep him company. And I know that many truckers do it, especially in that part of the Matehuala highway where several women gather on the lonely shoulders looking for work. According to what Ramon told me, he had always heard stories, warnings from other drivers who said it was not good to pick up just any woman for your truck because, supposedly, not all the pretty faces of Matehuala were real. Ramon thought they meant that many of them were men, trans, but no, that wasn't what they were trying to tell him. Rahman says that one night the fatigue and loneliness got the better of him because he had driven almost all day and still had hours to go to reach his destination. So, when he saw a woman standing under a streetlight on the road to Matehuala, he didn't think twice. The woman looked normal, wearing tight clothes, long hair, and a very calm smile. Ramon picked her up without thinking too much, and she settled into the passenger seat. They started talking softly as if they didn't want to wake anyone up. Something strange, I think. According to him, the woman spoke softly, with a voice that gave great confidence. In fact, she told him she was cold, that she had been waiting a while for some driver to pick her up so she could start working. Ramon listened to her while moving along the empty highway. The truck's engine rumbled as always. And after a while, when they were further away from the shoulder, the woman suggested going to the sleeper cabin to be more comfortable. Ramon didn't think twice and pulled over a little to turn off the main lights. The cabin was in complete darkness at that moment, barely illuminated by a piece of moon coming through the poorly closed curtain. He sat next to her, feeling a breath nearby, but when he started to touch her, something didn't add up. He told me that from the first moment, he felt something strange, as if under the skin there was no flesh, no muscle, or anything soft. It was like touching bone-pure, cold bones. At first, he thought it was his imagination, that perhaps the woman was very thin, or that the darkness was covering her completely and he was touching something else. But every time he ran his arm over the woman, if it was her neck or her back, he felt rigid, hard, dry contours. It was like running a hand over a hanging skeleton. He spoke softly to the woman, asking if she was okay, if she wanted to turn on the light, or if she needed anything, but she didn't respond. She didn't make a single sound. Ramon stayed still, with his heart pounding against his chest, waiting for some word, some laughter, something that would bring him back to reality, but nothing. Then, with a fear that almost paralyzed him, he reached out his hand to the cabin switch, and when he turned on the light, Ramon couldn't believe it. What was lying on his bed was not a woman. It was a human skeleton, a complete skeleton lying on its side as if it had died right there. This thing didn't have a single piece of flesh, no clothes, nothing that could explain what had happened. It was just a dry, yellow skeleton with its jaw open as if it had been screaming. Ramon screamed so loud he said the truck's windows began to vibrate very strongly. Then, with a terror that made him tremble from head to toe, he gathered courage. He grabbed the skeleton with his hands, feeling it crumble a little as he moved it, and threw it out of the truck, falling onto the gravel of the highway. Then, without thinking much, he took off without looking back, accelerating with such desperation that one could almost say he was crashing. Several kilometers further ahead, when he reached a safe rest stop, he was trembling so much he couldn't even drink the coffee offered to him by the drivers nearby. Once a bit more relaxed, when he told everyone what he had seen, what had happened, several went silent, and others crossed themselves, although that was very strange because he thought they were going to call him crazy, but they didn't. There, they told him something else. "Oh, so you already had to see her, the Phantom of the 57, right? The one who gets on but never gets off, right? It is said that on that highway, a very pretty woman gets into the cars of those who stop, but that she isn't actually a woman. Rather, it is the spirit of one who, God knows why, keeps appearing in that place. But what is said is that this apparition is something grotesque, that to many she appears as a very beautiful woman, but then her face becomes disfigured. Some say they have seen her in the form of an animal, as if she were a Nahual, and in other cases, or failing that, as happened to my friend, they see her turned into a skeleton. The reason why she appears like that, nobody knows, but the fact is that she keeps appearing to this day. After that occasion, Ramon never picked up anyone on the highway again. He said that that night he learned that not all the stories told among truckers are exaggerations. Some are more warnings than anything else. And he had the misfortune of confirming in his own flesh that one of those legends is true. Scream. If you are liking the stories, I invite you to leave us a like and subscribe to this great family of the paranormal. Moving on. I had an acquaintance that everyone in the area called Maricela, a woman who dedicated herself to the gallant life, selling caresses, as they say vulgarly. That acquaintance worked on the worn-out streets of the Napper neighborhood in Ciudad Juarez, a very famous place where women of that type work. Maricela was one of those strong women who had made it on their own, who worked without depending on anyone, and who always took great care with her clients. Because there, between the darkness of the unlit avenues and the cold that comes from the desert, lunatics abound, obsessives, criminals, and, as many say, things that aren't even human. Maricela was smart. She knew how to choose her encounters. But one night in June 2014, she met a man who would change her life forever. According to what she told sometime later, she said that at first that man who hired her seemed very normal. He dressed simply, had a calm gaze, a low voice, and even treated her with respect. He paid well and showed no type of rudeness. Well, a gentleman, so to speak. But as they say, those quiet ones, those calm ones are the worst of all. They are the ones you have to be most careful of. And that was the first sign of all. Sometimes the kindest are the most dangerous. Over time, the man became a frequent client, so much so that Maricela considered him a regular. But soon, the situation began to twist. He became obsessed with her in a sick way, as he began to spend hours waiting for her on the corner, watching her from his car without speaking. When any client approached her, he would appear out of nowhere, interrupt, and invent that Maricela was busy or that she wasn't working that night. There were nights when he scared off her suitors by following them in his car until they left and moved away from Maricela. In short, he was isolating her. He only wanted her for himself. Maricela began to feel fear because it was no longer a matter of work. It was pure, possessive, and violent stalking. But the worst was when she told him she didn't want to see him anymore, that he should let her work in peace. The man stood there, without moving, without blinking, with an icy smile, as if he had expected exactly that moment. From there, everything got worse. Maricela says that she started to feel strange starting from that cursed day. Maricela says that the first thing that happened was that she started having repetitive dreams, dreams where that man always looked for her, called her by her name, and she ran toward him, even though she didn't want to. She was by his side against her will. After the dreams came the weakness. Maricela began to lose weight without explanation. Her eyes sank and she felt tired even after sleeping. She had nightmares where she saw herself dressed as a bride, walking among graves, marrying him in front of an open headstone, as if that marriage were also her burial. And the most terrible thing of all was that, despite her terror, she felt a disturbing need to be near that man, as if something inside her pushed her to look for him, even though her mind screamed the opposite. That wasn't her obsession, it was something darker. From that, we all realized that Maricela wasn't acting normal, because one night, crying and trembling, she confessed to us that she felt she was going crazy. That was when we took her to the madrina, a witch that many workers knew, because she was the one who provided protection to all of them, the woman who always wore a black shawl and who had saved many girls from similar or worse things. The famous madrina lived in a small house that smelled of rosemary, smoke, and wet earth, with jars hanging in the corners and black candles lit almost all the time. When Maricela entered, the madrina just shook her head at her. "Someone has put a spell, amare, on you, mija," she said without Maricela being able to say a single word, "and it is a very strong spell. That man wants you for himself, and if it's not for him, it's for no one. Either you go with him, or you go crazy," the madrina told her. At that moment, Maricela broke down. She cried, saying she didn't know what to do, that she didn't want to be with that cursed man, but that she felt something pulling her from within. The madrina worked all night, brought out herbs, prayed very strange words. She even burned photographs of Maricela herself, because she knew perfectly well that that man was casting a strong spell on her, and the only way to free her was to break that union that that man was making. Therefore, she broke red ribbons that were tied in the woman's hair. And in the end, after a lot, after breaking many things and burning others, it all finished. Although not entirely, I think. You have to leave here, mija. If you stay, he will find you again, and after that there will be no spell or liberation that will free you. You will end up, yes or no, in his hands or dead. Maricela listened to the madrina, because 2 days later, she left the state without saying goodbye to practically anyone, and after that, no one saw her in person again. She just sent us messages from time to time to tell us how she was, and apparently she was fine, because it was through these messages that she told us that that cursed man had been doing witchcraft on her for weeks, and she knew that if she returned to the state, to the city, she would fall into the hands of that guy, that cursed lunatic who had become obsessed with her. The madrina, who has always been a person with a lot of experience, told us that witchcraft of passion is the most dangerous, because it doesn't look for love, it looks for possession. And Maricela was just inches away from becoming the eternal wife of a madman, even if it was in his graveyard. That is why I say to everyone, but mainly to you women, to you girls, that if one day you feel something strange in your body, whether with your partner or with whoever you are with, check the symptoms and the characteristics that I have given you, because one never knows when they might be doing witchcraft to you without you realizing it. Women, love is one thing, and possession is another. Don't be with someone you don't love, much less just to do them a favor. I always say that the street where I worked wasn't normal. It wasn't just any red light district. That street had something that weighed heavily on it, something you felt as soon as you stepped on the sidewalk. I'm not here to say that I earned what happened to me, and I don't want to justify the things that have happened to me, much less saying it's all because I work at night, but, of course, what I tell you, I know is very strange, and I hope you believe me. First of all, this happened a long time ago over on the outskirts of Tepido, on a street that many know as the Street of the Three Shadows. This has this name because, as it is told, 3 women used to appear there who died working on a corner, each in a different year and in circumstances that were never clarified very well. I didn't believe any of that when I started, because I thought they were stories to scare people, to keep the women of the night more united, so that we wouldn't walk alone in the alleys. But over time you learn that in this job there are things that have no logical explanation, and one of those things was this. It all started a week after a colleague named Roxana passed away. She was 28 years old, she was fun, talkative, and always said the street wasn't going to beat her. However, one day a client took her to a rundown hotel and she never returned because they found her beaten and abandoned. Her corner remained empty for several days, but you know how this is. Nobody can leave work for very long, and I, who was one of the newest, decided to stand in that spot because there were always good clients there. From then on, everything started to feel weird. The first night I heard footsteps behind me when there was nobody there. Then I heard low laughter as if someone were mocking me. But of course, when I turned around, absolutely nobody was seen. The other women always looked at me with a serious face as if wanting to tell me something until one of them, a fairly well-known girl, grabbed my arm and said, "Look, that corner is where Roxana died. And it's not that I'm a bad person, but she was very jealous of her things. The way they took her away wasn't pretty, and it is said by many that she has been seen around here haunting. I don't want to say that it's going to scare you, but go with great care. Is that okay?" I thought it was just a warning. Something about jealousy, perhaps, but then the true terror began. One night around 2:00 inches the morning, I was standing there smoking, bored because nothing had happened for a good while when I saw her. At first, I thought it was another worker approaching, but this one didn't walk normally. She advanced slowly, as if she were sliding. When the streetlight hit her, I was completely frozen. It was Roxana. She had the same clothes, the same smeared makeup, the swollen mouth, very similar to how it was said they had found her on the day of her passing. But the worst were her black, empty eyes. I couldn't move. I felt like my legs were nailed to the floor. She stood a few meters from me, watching me without blinking, and then she raised her hand, pointing at me as if telling me she had come looking for something. She didn't speak. She didn't make a sound, but I understood perfectly. I felt a frightful cold on the back of my neck as if I had been locked inside a freezer. I ran to where the other women were, almost out of air, crying, but they didn't believe me, or they didn't want to believe me when I told them. They said I was simply dreaming, or that I was high, from consuming things. I tried not to return to work for a while, but necessity pulled me, and sometimes one has no other choice. The following week was hell. Every time I stood near that corner, I heard footsteps behind me, breathing in my ear, the shadow of a woman who looked a lot like Roxana. On one occasion, while I was talking to a client, he stared at me, but not just at me, but as if something were behind me. And then his face turned paper white, and he said to me, "Hey, is that your friend behind you? Why does she look so pale?" At that moment, I turned around, but behind me was no one. I asked the man what he was seeing, and he said he saw a woman very similar to Roxana behind me, but pale, like a dead person. When he said that, I felt a cold that ran all the way down my spine, and I knew that the dead one had latched onto me. At that moment, I understood that having stood on Roxana's corner made her climb onto my shoulders. After that, the clients stopped approaching that place. Every time I tried to talk to one, they all moved away. They were scared, and very strange things happened. That is why I decided to seek help to get rid of that ghost that had climbed onto me, to get rid of Roxana. Fortunately, I went to a person who did cleansings, a lady who told me exactly what I thought, that having worked so long in that corner, Roxana had made it her own. And now that I had moved to the alley, she was jealous of the alley, so she had latched onto me. She had climbed onto me like a negative energy, and the only way I could get rid of her was with a ritual, which started by putting a white candle in her alley, in her corner, and telling her to leave, to transcend, that she should already be in the other world resting. I did it, community. I placed a white candle, and for many days I was asking her from my heart to leave, to rest, and to leave this earthly world. Call it what you want. That did end up happening. The woman ended up transcending because I stopped feeling bad, and to this day I have never felt Roxana's presence again. That being said, I am very careful in case she returns one day, but what is true is that ghosts don't always leave. Hello to all. What I am sharing is something an old acquaintance named Karina told me, whom I dealt with for a time while both of us worked on the streets of Mexico City. I cannot attest that this is real, however, I am telling you so that more than one of you knows what happened and can give me your point of view. Karina insisted that in Mexico City there had always been many dangers. She had encountered violent men, aggressive clients, corrupt police, but nothing, absolutely nothing compares to what she faced that night. Something that simply has no explanation, something that seemed to come out of a dark corner where human things no longer exist. This happened in the year 2011 when Karina worked on the Calzada de Tlalpan, in that block where the lights flicker and one never knows if the car that stops will be of help or condemnation. That was a cold night with a strange fog that seemed to embrace the lampposts. Karina had been hours without work when suddenly a very tall man approached her, one who dressed in an elegant suit, too elegant for the area, she says. The guy wore a black hat that covered almost his entire face, and his movements were slow, rigid. It was as if he were uncomfortable even within his own body. That man didn't talk much, didn't make any greeting gesture. He simply extended his hand with some folded bills. Despite how strange it all looked, Karina accepted since she needed the money and the man was paying very well. Karina says that man had something strange in his presence, a cold around him that wasn't normal, much less on that night. But the most disturbing thing was his silence, since he never said a word, didn't even make a sigh or a sound, nothing. It was as if he were a piece of human-shaped furniture. The man took her to a discreet hotel, one of those where pink lights seem to hide more than they illuminate. Karina remembered that the man didn't walk like other guys, that he had abrupt movements, almost square, as if his joints weren't entirely flexible. Karina tried to convince herself that perhaps the man was very shy, or that he was someone sick who couldn't move well and that's why he sought a service of this type. Karina tells that as soon as they entered the hotel room, the environment was much colder than usual, so much so that even the motel window had frost, as if it had snowed outside something impossible for Mexico City. Then the man sat on the bed and told Karina that they were going to start, but please, not to be scared, just to give him the service and that's it. Karina didn't understand what the guy was referring to with that. That was why she was afraid of not knowing what she was going to encounter that night, since throughout all her time working as a server of that, she had encountered very strange fetishes. It is here that everything becomes disturbing, community. She says that the first thing she noticed was the man's skin, because it didn't have a normal color, not that of a human being. His skin was too pale, too smooth. She says it didn't have pores and that it shone much more than the texture of real skin. It looked more like plastic. Plastic in a nutshell, but not the plastic of a pretty doll, but an old one, yellowed by all the years, cracked in some parts. Even the second thing she noticed was that the man didn't breathe. His chest was completely still, and the third and most horrible thing of all, the man had no expression whatsoever. The guy had something like a painted face, as if someone had tried to draw a face on top of something that wasn't human. Karina, paralyzed, took a step back, but the man or whatever it was began to get up with awkward movements, as if an internal force were pushing his joints so that they would function. The arm bent too slowly. Then the neck creaked with the sound of old wood, as if he were learning to move, or as if he had never walked before. Karina wanted to scream, but her voice wouldn't come out as she was so deathly afraid seeing that the figure began to walk toward her. Because what was in front of Karina wasn't a man, it was a mannequin, a cursed mannequin that had hired her for a carnal service. As soon as that thing was shedding garment by garment, Karina saw something that she could never get out of her head. On the wrist, just behind its plastic skin, a metallic joint was visible, something like a hinge, like the union of that mannequin. Karina backed away, stumbling over the bed, and fell to the floor. The disturbing mannequin leaned toward her, but its head bent with great softness, as if it fell to one side with a dull thud, as if it didn't have muscles to hold itself up. That blow caused the mannequin's mouth to open in a strange way, or rather, it had broken from the blow it gave itself. Karina, because of the fear she had, took her things and left that place. However, that mannequin shouted at her, told her not to leave, that he had already paid for the service. Eventually, Karina gathered the necessary strength and kept running through the motel hallway, so much so that she didn't look back even once. The friends who saw her leave counted that Karina came out screaming from that motel. She did it barefoot and without her purse, without money, without anything. The poor thing was so deathly afraid that she took the first taxi she found and went straight home. Time later, Karina told all of this to those people around her, about how a man-mannequin, hired her to have carnal services. She doesn't know exactly what happened with that man because she left him in the motel and didn't want to go back anymore. The thing is that man, or rather mannequin, didn't go back to look for Karina or any other woman to give him the service either. He simply disappeared. Karina keeps maintaining that what hired her that night was a mannequin, something made of plastic, something that shouldn't move, but that, for some strange reason, it did. Because mannequins do exist, and if there is something they know on this channel, it is that those things are indeed alive. I remind you that we have daily videos and live streams every night of the Wednesdays and Saturdays. Thank you very much for your support. Moving on. Good evening, CH family. My name is Dahlia. What I'm going to tell you is something that happened to me a few years ago when I was still working on a corner near an abandoned building in Mexico City. First of all, I tell you that I had never had a fear as real as the one I lived that night. And before you tell me that I saw wrong, or that it was a hallucination, I must tell you that I don't drink and I don't get into strange things either. I was totally sane when I saw that. So, I hope you don't call me crazy because what I'm going to tell you is going to sound extremely unreal. I remember perfectly that all this happened on a Tuesday, one of those where everything seems to be very dead. The city even felt heavier than normal. I was standing near an old hotel, and in front of me was an abandoned building that had been deteriorating for years. I don't want to say the address, but when you hear what I'm going to tell you, you will know more or less where this place is located. That building I'm referring to was tall, gray in color, with some broken windows and some graffiti on top of other graffiti. But what always called attention to that building in general were its gargoyles. This one had several, all different, as if they had bought them separately and had placed them singing just to scare people. I never knew exactly why there were gargoyles on that building. In fact, the people around me didn't know exactly their purpose either, since these seemed to have been in that home for decades. Of all those gargoyles, there was one in particular that always looked stranger than the others. This one had its wings half open, as if it were ready to fly, and its mouth half open, showing some stone teeth. I never liked to look at it, but it was part of the landscape of my job, I think, or so I thought. That night, while I was waiting for some work to come, I looked up unintentionally and realized something that wasn't right. That gargoyle I spoke of before had shiny eyes. I don't know how to explain it, community, since it was as if it had moisture or as if the light from the corner post was reflected on a surface that wasn't stone. I was uncomfortable, but I said it was surely my imagination, that I needed to sleep more or drink more coffee. And that was why I continued working and didn't pay more importance to that. What I did do was walk from side to side to distract myself, trying to ignore that sensation that someone was watching me from above. That's how I spent a couple of hours without clients. It was like 3:00 inches the morning when I decided to move to an alley near the hotel to rest my legs a bit. That alley was always empty, silent, with a smell of humidity. High up, the cables could be heard moving with the wind, and since I had been there many times, I wasn't afraid. But that night, the moment I stood inside that alley, I felt a chill run down my back. I leaned against the wall and closed my eyes for a moment, but suddenly I heard something behind me. This was like a harsh sound, as if something heavy were dragging itself across a concrete surface. I opened my eyes and my heart began to beat very fast, because upon turning toward the entrance of the alley, there was no one, but a thud was heard on the high part of the wall as if something had fallen on it. Then, without thinking, I looked up, and community, just as you imagine it, the gargoyle, the same one from that building, the one that scared me so much. It was stuck to the wall with its wings open, looking directly at me with eyes shining. But the worst of all that was that I saw it move, because it didn't move like an animal. This one moved like an object made rigid of stone. The gargoyle had come to life and was near me. The stone fingers of that thing were buried between the bricks of the wall. Its neck creaked every time it turned it, and its jaw opened and closed with that sound like two stones clashing. I stayed paralyzed. I wanted to run, to scream, to do something, but my legs wouldn't respond. The creature began to descend the wall, not walking, but sliding as if it were part of the masonry. Every time they stopped, its eyes were fixed on me, and I felt a heavy, empty gaze, as if that thing did have a soul. I don't know how much time I was there, quiet, seeing how that thing was coming down the wall. But when my legs finally reacted, I ran out without thinking twice. But the sound that was heard behind me was worse than anything else. It was a dull thud, then another, and then another, as if something very large were chasing me down the street. I swear to you, community, that I didn't look back, I didn't want to do it, But the shadow projected in front of me due to the lights that were behind me was not of anything else but that stone gargoyle that was following me. And although it sounds like madness, I swear that that inanimate thing had come to life and was behind me. While I ran, I heard its wings hitting the concrete and the air moving with every jump it took. And it wasn't until I reached the main avenue where there were lights and people coming out of a nearby bar that I dared to turn back, but as you all must imagine, just when I did it, the gargoyle was no longer there. I looked at the contiguous buildings, and that thing was no longer there. The last thing I managed to see, and I think it was to see how a small thing already very far away was moving away, climbing some roofs of the nearest houses. I stayed completely still, trembling, grabbing the streetlight without knowing what to do, since I was practically stalked by a gargoyle. Shortly after, a security guard from one of the nearby bars approached me to ask if I was okay, since he saw me in such bad condition that he thought I had ingested some type of substance or that I was extremely drunk. I told him I wasn't under the influence of either, but I did tell him what I had seen, how the gargoyle from that building was following me. The guard simply started to laugh and thought that yes, I was under the influence of some substance. Eventually, I didn't work that night anymore and went directly to my house with that sensation of not knowing if what I saw was a dream or not. But community, I swear that a stone gargoyle had come to life and was following me. You ask yourselves which gargoyle. I'm talking about. Search for gargoyles in Mexico City, and I am completely sure that the building I'm talking about will come up, and very surely you are going to find the gargoyle that chased me that night. If you are liking the stories, I invite you to leave us a like and subscribe to this great family of the paranormal. Moving on. Hello to all the Quinta Historias family. My name is not important for this story. What matters is what happened to me and that I want to share in this medium. First of all, I'll tell you that I work on the streets of Aguascalientes near the Mexico Park area, where at night everything becomes quieter than it should be. This happened to me a few months ago, and I didn't want to pass up sharing my anecdote, hoping you believe me. Well, that was a dawn night in the month of March of the year 2024. It was a cold dawn, one of those where the wind drags old papers and the posts give little light because of the poor lighting of the city. Of course, I had finished my shift and just wanted to reach my rented room at the end of the colony, but for that I always crossed Mexico Park because it was the fastest way, although many colleagues said it was dangerous. But I had been crossing there for years and nothing bad had ever happened to me, so I didn't see any problem at all. That dawn I was tired, with aching feet and a head full of thoughts. Since it was very cold, I wrapped myself well in my jacket and started to cross the park, which was completely empty at that hour. There wasn't even a drunk, nor a stray dog, nor a car passing by the avenues, nothing. Perhaps only the noise of the trees moving, and that's it. But in the middle of the park, I heard something that made me stop dead in my tracks. They were laughs, but not normal laughs, not laughs of people having a good time. These were low laughs, like naughty children hiding behind some bush. I thought they were vagrants or kids, so I sped up my pace to get out as fast as possible. But then I heard a deep voice that called me by my name, and I swear to you that I went cold, because nobody in that area knows what my name is, really, not even my colleagues. I stayed still with my teeth clenched, trying to convince myself that I had heard wrong, and then another voice responded, a higher voice, almost like that of a child saying a secret. Not today, leave her, she's tired. I felt my skin crawl, and I didn't want to look back for fear that it was some men wanting to take advantage of me. In short, I didn't want to see who was talking about me at those hours, but my legs trembled so much that I had to lean on a tree to keep from falling. With much fear, I breathed deeply, trying to maintain calm, and when I gathered the courage to turn my head a little, I saw them. Right there were two dogs, two huge dogs, one black and the other white, sitting perfectly straight as if they were people. The black dog was large, with fur as dark as coal and yellow eyes that shone as if they had fire inside. The white one, for its part, was worse. It had an eye out of place hanging to one side as if it had detached, and even so, it seemed to see. And both were looking directly at me without blinking, without moving. But the worst of it all wasn't just seeing them, but hearing them. The black dog raised its head and, with an almost human voice, deep, of an adult man, said, "Now she has seen us." I let out a choked scream, for I heard clearly how that dog spoke, and it did so with a human voice. Then the white dog, with an icy child's voice, added, "We told you not to call her. She scares easily. I swear to you that I almost fainted. My body wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move, and they kept talking as if I were an old topic of conversation. The black dog tilted its head as if it were analyzing me from head to toe, and every movement it made was too slow to be normal. It was as if that dog's skin were attached to something that wasn't adhered to its bone. "We've been following her for 3 nights, said that black dog. "She always passes alone, nobody looks after her." Then the white dog stood up on 2 legs. Yes, on 2 cursed legs, and walked a couple of steps toward me, swaying as if it were learning to be human. "We don't like how she smells," said this white dog with a child's voice. It was then that I reacted and felt an animal impulse inside me, as if my body understood something that my mind didn't. If I didn't run, I wouldn't live to tell about it. I turned halfway around and ran off without looking back. To be honest, I don't know if those animals kept talking, because upon turning back, those 2 dogs stayed sitting there, quiet. They didn't even flee behind me, they just watched me move away into the distance. I don't know how, but I reached the main avenue where I managed to stop a taxi, and I got in to head directly to my house. The next morning I went to the park, that same one where I encountered those dogs. I wanted to convince myself that it had been a nightmare, that those animals shouldn't be able to talk, that it had all been dreams, hallucinations, fatigue. But when I arrived at that place, I didn't see any of those dogs. Neither the black nor the white one were around there. So, I am not sure if those animals indeed talked that night, but I can assure you that they did. I heard them, and these 2 dogs, talked with human voices. Since that date, I stopped passing through that place. I prefer to go around or take a taxi home, because I am sure that the dogs talk and that I had the misfortune of encountering 2 of them. 2 that I have never seen again in my entire life, and that I hope I never encounter again, that is certain. Hello to the entire Cuenta Historias community. My name is Alondra, and I try not to talk much about this type of thing, not because I don't believe, but because it scares me bad. Bad fear, because I don't know exactly what it was that I saw that night, if it was a sick man, a ghost, or something much worse. The only thing I know is that that night changed my life forever. It all started about 3 years ago when I worked in an area that was between the old central bus station and a cluster of abandoned warehouses in the center of Michoacan. There, between the shadows and the dirty light of the posts, was where several women stood who dedicated themselves to, selling caresses. Each one looked for their own, some to support their children, others to survive the next day. I did it because I had no other choice, since it was the only way to gather enough for rent and send some money to my mom who was in the town. I know it isn't a pretty job, but I didn't have many options. And it was in that era when he appeared. I remember it perfectly. A man, taller than any client I had ever seen before. He always dressed completely in black, with a long coat that dragged a little on the ground and a top hat, equally dark, that covered his face almost always. This client always approached slowly as if he always came for me. He didn't talk, he just stopped in front. He raised his hand and extended some folded bills. Curiously, he always paid me more than I charged. I always asked him what exactly he wanted, but he never answered me. I didn't know why he paid extra, but he just had that detail. I remember his aroma wasn't unpleasant, but it wasn't normal either. It was like something I never knew how to identify. Despite how strange that client was, I must say that he never disrespected me, never touched more than necessary, never asked for anything strange. He just wanted me to accompany him to a cheap motel, always the same one, room number 12. The routine was always the same. We would enter, he would sit for a while on the edge of the bed, breathing slowly as if it were difficult for him, and then he wanted me to sit next to him. Sometimes he would ask me with a gesture of his hand to talk about simple things, for me to ask him how his day went, what he had eaten, and how his family was. I would ask him that, and he would listen to me motionless. I know it sounds very strange, community, but you would be surprised how many people seek someone who listens to them more than something carnal. And in this case, this man was always what he looked for, company. What was strange is that I could never see his face very well. He always covered it with that strange hat, and the little light in the room didn't help much either. The guy never showed signs of emotions. Sometimes I thought he was someone very lonely, someone who didn't want to be recognized around there, who didn't want them to know that he entered a cheap motel with a woman. In this way, several weeks passed, and He always came at the same time, always paid almost double, always entered the same room, and nothing more. But little by little, I began to notice details that didn't let me sleep about that man. One night, while I was talking, I got the impression that his chest didn't move when breathing. I thought it was my imagination, but another night, when we entered the same room, I heard a strange echo behind him, as if there were two people talking, although there were only us. And what disturbed me most of all those encounters was that once I saw a shadow, one that seemed to get long and short at the same time, one that was always behind that man, but that didn't correspond to him. I don't know very well how to explain it, but it was a shadow that was with him, but it wasn't his shadow. It was as if it had a life of its own or something like that. I never dared to ask that man anything, because the money he gave me was very good and I never had to do anything other than listen to him. And well, he was always very kind to me, or at least that was the case until one night that changed everything. I feel that I still feel a chill when remembering this. That night, it was colder than normal. I remember there was no wind or rain, only cold. It was as if a bad omen were in the very air. That night, like so many others, we entered room number 12 of the motel. But this time, the man didn't sit on the bed. He stood in front of the mirror with his back to me. He had his head down as if he were listening to something inside the mirror. I didn't know whether to talk to him or wait for him, but what I did know was that I shouldn't interrupt him. Then he asked me with a gesture to approach. I went, although I felt my legs weaken like gelatin. Then the man took off his coat with slow movements, too slow, as if his arms had extra weight. Then he started to raise his hands toward the hat, and that was when something inside me screamed not to do it, that I shouldn't see his face. But it was too late. With a smooth movement, he raised his hat. In community, I swear to you, I should never have seen that. Why? Where his face should have been, there was nothing. There was no disfigured face, there was no sick face, just as you hear it, there was nothing. What the guy had was like a dark mass, formless, without eyes, like a void moving, which breathed, contracting as if it were alive, but didn't have facial features. I don't know exactly how to describe this, but it was that something formless that moved, something black that seemed to absorb light, something that wasn't human. As soon as I saw that, I felt my heart stop. I screamed and screamed as much as I could, although sometimes I feel that my voice wouldn't come out. The guy didn't say anything either, he just stood there looking at me. I could swear to you, community, that every time I was near him it seemed that he did have features, that he did have a face, but that night, I don't know why his face was completely empty. Then, without any type of violent gesture, he put his hat back on, turned slowly, and handed me extra money as always. After that, the guy simply left the room. I remember he turned to look at me one more time, and although he never said it, I feel that he thanked me for something as if I had done him a great favor. Then the guy closed the room and didn't return anymore. I stayed there standing without knowing what to do, and it wasn't until I came out of the shock and managed to run out of that motel. That was the last time I saw that guy, since that disturbing man never came back to look for me, never returned to the alley for any other girl. The strange thing was that nobody in the area saw him either. I ended up asking about the guy to know what I had seen, if the people in the surroundings knew him, but nobody, absolutely nobody, says they have seen him. When I started to tell what had happened to me with that man, some people told me that perhaps the guy was sick, that he used a mask, or that he had a prosthesis, but I am completely sure that the guy didn't have a face, that it was completely smooth what was there. To this day, I don't know exactly what it was that I saw, and in a way, I don't want to know. If you have any story you wish to share with this pleasant community, I invite you to send it, whether by email or the Facebook page. I would appreciate it if you activate all notifications to be up to date with the stories that are uploaded daily. Thank you very much for letting me reach your ears.